tens of thousands had gathered in the capital calling for electoral reform. But the government says the demonstration was illegal and that police were simply trying to maintain order. Margot Ortigas has more.
They were told not to come, but they came anyway. Confrontations between pro-reform demonstrators and police turned violent on the streets of Kuala Lumpur, precisely what the government said it wanted to avoid by banning the demonstrations in the first place. Tens of thousands came in clusters, hoping to make their way through different routes to Merdeka Stadium, the site of Malaysia's declaration of independence from Britain over 50 years ago. The protesters are calling for electoral reform and transparency in governance. But there were other groups that turned out too. These demonstrators, much fewer in number, came in support of the government. None of the sides were spared as police arrested hundreds, including opposition politicians and the leaders of all the groups, calling it unfair. Police presence has been heavy here since Friday, effectively shutting down the capital city. Some have called it an overreaction that has instead provoked the chaos that transpired. Others feel it's this very police presence that actually led to fewer demonstrators turning out than originally expected.
The particular event here is also a polarized society between those who support government and buy the government line versus those who actually genuinely want to see some kind of democratic reforms take place in Malaysia before the next general election.
Tensions remain high as protesters now try to figure out where to take things from here. But they have succeeded in getting the attention they wanted. Attention that doesn't reflect well on the government of Prime Minister Najib Razak. This is a nation that cannot hide nor ignore its deep divisions for much longer. Margot Ortigas, Aljazeera, Kuala Lumpur.
Well, Wong Chin Huat is a political scientist and a member of the Bersih steering committee, the group that organised the rally. We're talking live now from Kuala Lumpur. Wong Chin, we understand that you took part in today's protests and that you were tear gassed. Just tell us briefly what happened when you were on the streets this morning.
Well, the police fire tear gases indiscriminately to the crowd. So then we walk, many of us still make it, about at least 50,000 people successfully defied the blockade and repressions of the police violence, and we make it to the street. We make it an important day in Malaysian history because Malaysians are overcoming fear of violence.
There are reports that one person was killed. What have you been hearing there?
Well, what we learned is that this person was killed suffering from discomfort after tear gases being fired at his direction. We condemn the unnecessary violence used by the police. We could have the rally peacefully conducted without anyone suffering any violence and chaos. The violence is completely unjustified and inflicted by the police themselves.
So how successful do you think the rally was? I mean, lots of your members were arrested, but do you think you got your message across?
Oh, certainly. I think you are seeing a new Malaysia emerging. We are overcoming our fear. We want democratization. We managed to force the government now to rethink its position because it's no longer just electoral reform. It's a question now about power abuse, because for the last 3 weeks, more than 300 people have been arrested for various reasons, including wearing yellow, cleaning up their community. Anything that has to do with cleanliness has become a dirty word. And you know, the state is in such a state of paranoia. And we managed to force the state now to recognize the fact that democratization is a must. The Prime Minister Najib administration cannot continue denying the need for democratization while pledging for economic reform.
And you talk about Prime Minister Najib and democratization. I mean, he's coming under increasing pressure to announce political reforms ahead of a possible election next year. If he does announce those reforms, will it be enough to stop the protests, do you think?
Certainly. I think that what Malaysians want is not just necessarily a change of government, but what they want is a process that they can have a real control of who would be their government. We want the power to hire and fire politicians just like people in every other democracy.
All right, Wong Chin Huat there in Kuala Lumpur, thank you. Now, Iran has announced it tested 2 long-range